This podcast is made possible by you, the supporters of WPLN and WNXP, Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's January 17th, 2025. On this day in 1994, a massive earthquake shook Southern California. It quickly became known as the Northridge Quake, named after the town closest to its epicenter. But the damage covered much of the Los Angeles area. At least 57 people died, although some counts attribute more than 70 deaths to the quake. Thousands were injured. It did about $20 billion in damage costs, plus another $40 billion in economic losses. It was the costliest earthquake in U.S. history. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Anytime there's a natural disaster, the state and federal governments are supposed to work together to get help to communities and to learn how to better prepare for the next disaster. Sometimes it works relatively well. Sometimes it's a total mess. The Northridge quake was incredibly expensive in lives and dollars lost, and lessons learned in that response led the federal government to pick up the pace on a project to change zoning and building requirements to make sure structures in high-risk areas are as earthquake-safe as possible. So some good work came out of it. Hurricane Katrina, on the other hand, was more of a worst-case scenario. When that storm devastated New Orleans, it showed how much can go wrong when local, state, and federal agencies don't work together well, and just how tragic the end result can be when there isn't a thorough and realistic evacuation plan for that type of weather event. Here in Nashville, the 2010 flood resulted in a permanent change to some neighborhoods. We all became much more aware of the extent of floodplains along our rivers, and the city used FEMA money to buy some homeowners out of their property, turning that land into park area instead. And going further back, the 1998 tornadoes here fundamentally changed East Nashville. For several decades prior to that storm, it was largely a deeply impoverished part of town. There had been some moves to start fixing up homes and bring in new investment, but up until that point, change had been slow and organic. Then the storm ripped the roofs off hundreds of homes. It took a while for insurance money and FEMA handouts to roll in. For months, it seemed like every house had a blue tarp instead of shingles. Many landlords, in some cases, slumlords would be the more accurate term, well, they decided they'd rather sell to house flippers and middle-class DIYers than to fix things up for their longtime renters. What had so recently been a scary part of town to most middle-class Middle Tennesseans became the cool place to be, which also meant that, suddenly, some of Nashville's poorest residents couldn't afford to live in the part of town they'd always called home. They moved out, breaking connection with the churches and schools that had always been theirs, wondering where they might find a new sense of community, a new place to call their own. Disaster aid is supposed to help a community rebuild smarter, yes, but hopefully it can primarily be rebuilding assistance for the people who were already there, not to turn disasters into investment opportunities at the expense of people who've already lost so much to Mother Nature. Governor Bill Lee has told us he's calling a special legislative session in a couple of weeks' time to consider bills related to three very specific subjects, and one of them is disaster relief. Ever since the remnants of Hurricane Helene brought incredibly destructive flooding to East Tennessee, state leaders have been debating how to pay for the state's portion of the recovery effort. The governor's solution was to borrow money from TennCare and use that to offer $100 million in loans to people affected by the storm. Some legislators are pushing to tap the state's rainy day fund, saying if we have more than $2 billion in emergency money, why shouldn't we spend it on helping people recover from a literal emergency? Meanwhile, everyone with even a passing interest in how the nation handles disaster aid is carefully watching what's going on with the response to the Los Angeles fires. President Biden just approved an aid package, but come Monday, he's not the president anymore. Actually carrying things out will be a job for the Trump White House. And while previous disasters have set the tone for future expectations in terms of disaster-proofing communities, this one could set the tone for how politicians handle allocations for relief funding, at least for the next 4 years. In just a few minutes, a closer look at the lawsuit over access to food stamps in Tennessee. That's coming up after the newscast.
You know how important WPLN News has been to you and your family, and you have seen how high-quality local journalism is necessary to a thriving community. You can ensure that this service stays strong and stays available to all of Nashville and Middle Tennessee. Join the Producers Circle with your gift of $100 or more each month and make the bold statement that you support the mission of a more informed and engaged community. Start your philanthropic journey with Nashville Public Radio today at WPLN.org.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Vocal spectators in the Tennessee House of Representatives could be banned from observing for 2 years under new rules passed yesterday. WPLN's Miriam reports.
When Cameron Sexton was reelected as House Speaker on Tuesday,
Mr. Speaker, we have 75 votes for Speaker Cameron Sexton, 23 votes for Leader Camper.
members of the public gallery booed the decision while the floor cheered.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
Now, Sexton will have the power to ban vocal observers from the House under a new rules package. First offenders will be banned for 2 legislative days. On the second expulsion, observers could be banned for up to 2 years when the next General Assembly convenes in 2027. Representative William Lamberth says they're already doing this in other legislatures.
There's very few things that D.C. gets right, but I will say when you visit the observation gallery of the House, you're not allowed to participate in any way, shape, form, or fashion. I mean, you are there to observe your government at work, but not to participate therein.
Since the Covenant school shooting in 2023, the House has continued to regulate what the public can do in the chamber, including blocking off half the gallery for guests of lawmakers. Mariana Bacallao, WPLN News.
Well, the annual legislative session just started this week, but the political priorities are already revealing themselves. In addition to school vouchers and hurricane relief, lawmakers seem to be focused on immigration enforcement. Our daily show, This is Nashville, talked with several WPLN reporters about the issues facing lawmakers. Reporter and afternoon producer Char Daston says Governor Bill Lee already pulled a strange procedural lever. He called a special session for January 27th, even though the General Assembly is already meeting for normal business. And in the meantime,
there have been, even in the regular session, 6 bills related to immigration and immigration enforcement, which is more than the last 10 years combined of laws that passed related to immigration enforcement.
Lee has also pledged to deploy Tennessee's National Guard troops to carry out President-elect Donald Trump's deportation program. That is, if requested. Attorney General Merrick Garland is ordering the federal government to stop implementing lethal injections with phenobarbital, saying the drug might cause unnecessary pain and suffering. That's the same drug Tennessee plans to use in its executions moving forward. The state announced the new protocol in December. Garland says there's still debate in scientific and medical research about whether the drug causes suffering, according to the Associated Press. Journalists who covered federal executions under the Trump administration reported prisoners shaking and shuddering as they died. Agencies like the Tennessee Department of Correction and Justice Department have pivoted to using only phenobarbital in place of a traditional 3-drug cocktail. That's because pharmaceutical companies refuse to sell any drugs for use in the death penalty. Governments have to secure them with clandestine means, and it's easier to source 1 drug than 3. The Tennessee State Marching Band, known as the Aristocrat of Bands, is now without a director. Reginald McDonald was removed from that position yesterday afternoon and placed on leave. Interim TSU President Dwayne Tucker pointed to an internal audit, saying that the findings indicate lack of compliance with school policy concerning travel costs. The investigation is ongoing. The TSU Band has represented the school everywhere from the Rose Bowl parade to the Grammy Awards to the White House and is one of the historically black school's most celebrated institutions. But last fall, the Aristocrat of Bands was forced to cancel its plans to travel to and perform at several away games due to the school's funding crisis. A Tennessee slaughterhouse is in the spotlight after having to pay a penalty for employing children. Investigators with the U.S. Labor Department found that Chattanooga-based company QSI illegally hired children to work overnight shifts at 13 different meat processing plants in 8 states. including Tennessee. QSI will have to pay a penalty of $400,000. The company disputes the accusation, saying that investigators did not find any current juvenile workers during its inspection. The Labor Department says too often companies will look the other way and claim their staffing agency or subcontractor is responsible. QSI says it has a zero-tolerance policy of employing underage workers and has taken steps to strengthen its hiring and compliance practices. If you believe performing art and healing go together, then Odessa Settle's life story is proof of that. She's a musician, activist, and healer who recently retired after 5 decades as a neonatal nurse at Vanderbilt Medical Center. Settles comes from a gospel music family and performed around the country even while bringing innovative care to at-risk babies and their families. On This is Nashville, Settles talked about how social activism from a place of love shows up in her music and in her former nursing career.
Just know that we all do what we know to do until we learn to do something different. Take that in the room with you when you go to see your patients. And I relate some stories, The thing that I have dealt with, of course, was racial discrimination and, being called names throughout my career. And what do you do when that happens? You can either get angry and walk out, or you can use that as a teaching moment, because we have to meet the people that we serve where they are. Don't take it personally. They have never met you before. So it's not about you. It's about where they came from.
Settles shares stories of how she bridges cultural divisions through healthcare and music in the full interview, which is available now in the This is Nashville podcast feed. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is not just a day off from work or school. It's also an opportunity to honor the historic civil rights leader through service, art, and activism. This weekend, many Nashville institutions are opening their doors to do just that. The Schermerhorn Symphony Center will offer a free concert Sunday evening with performances from several local choirs. On Monday, the National Museum of African American Music invites people to create their own protest signs and view its exhibits for free. There's also a citywide MLK commemoration throughout the weekend. It culminates in a march down Jefferson Street towards Tennessee State University. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. A federal court case says Tennessee is breaking the law by mishandling the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, also known as food stamps or EBT. There are a lot of allegations. Bottom line, the lawsuit claims DHS is systematically failing to help people who qualify for SNAP, and that has left families going without food, getting utilities shut off, and even becoming homeless. WPLN's health reporter Catherine Sweeney sat down with afternoon host LaTonya Turner to talk about the legal challenge.
Catherine, let's start with who filed this lawsuit. Tell me about the plaintiffs.
It's a class action lawsuit. So about a dozen people who had bad experiences being rejected for benefits that they actually qualified for are in this lawsuit. But the idea is they're representing thousands of Tennesseans who are in a similar situation, not just themselves. And along with them, it was the nonprofit, The Contributor. They say they're helping fewer people than they could be because they're dealing with red tape and difficulties with SNAP for their clients.
You said that Tennesseans who are actually entitled to benefits, the SNAP benefits, are getting rejected and having bad experiences. But what does that look like in reality?
What these stories look like from top to bottom, they apply, they get rejected, they go through months of an appeals process, and then it turns out that they were actually qualifying the whole time. So there are a lot of problems that came up over and over. Sometimes the agency got applicants' incomes wrong, and they rejected them for making too much money. One example, a woman was totally unemployed. She had no income, but they denied her for having too much income. I think one of the most frustrating trends had to do with documents. DHS was telling people, hey, you never uploaded this document, even though they had. And then the agency's own online portal showed the documents had been uploaded, but then they would get rejected for the missing document. Applicants have to do a phone interview to qualify, but there are several cases where the agency just never scheduled an interview, or they had an interview scheduled and never called the person, and then they rejected people for a missed interview.
Wow. This affects real people. So Tell me about some of the personal experiences that are detailed in the lawsuit.
One woman was named Brandy Tapia. She lives in Nashville with her 2-year-old. It said that she was missing a pay stub, but she had already uploaded it. And the records showed it was uploaded on her portal, on the phone, but she kept being told, hey, that never got uploaded. She uploaded it 3 separate times, which you could see in her file, and then ultimately she was rejected for a missing pay stub. By the time she did get the benefits, which took like getting a lawyer and going through this months-long appeals process, she and her son were evicted by then.
Wow, that's beyond frustrating. That really affects someone's well-being and that of her child. So tell us exactly what is at stake here in terms of the law.
Well, Congress created SNAP by passing a law in the 70s, and it has a bunch of requirements for states in it. The lawsuit says Tennessee is failing to meet those on a broad scale, which would be illegal. For example, the law says people shouldn't be rejected for a missed interview unless the agency can prove the applicant kind of skipped it on purpose. But again, they're rejecting people for missing interviews that were never even scheduled. The law also says that the rejected applications should get a decision on an appeal within 60 days. It's taking more like 100 days on average. There were cases in the lawsuit that took more than 150 days.
Wow. What happens if the plaintiffs win?
The litigants are asking the court to basically force DHS to reform the program. So this isn't a lawsuit where they're asking for money or damages. They're trying to get the court to tell DHS they have to do certain things. So they want the court to make a legal order where the DHS has to pitch an improvement plan and then follow it. They also want to bring in outside watchdogs, and they want to require monthly reports on ongoing problems like overdue applications.
Okay. What does DHS have to say about all this?
I have reached out for comment and haven't heard back yet. It's really common for state agencies, if they're in a lawsuit like this, to say that they can't comment on pending litigation.
Has anyone done this before in terms of a class action lawsuit with an agency, a service agency like this?
Yeah, so that's kind of a common strategy for people who are wanting kind of big picture overhaul reforms of an agency. So a great example would be here in Tennessee. We're one of something like more than a dozen states that had a big class action lawsuit like this against the foster care system because there were tragedies happening and the system was failing to protect kids. And so a lawsuit was filed in 2000, and then over the decades since then, they've had these watchdogs come in, they've had to file reports. There's been this whole process where the court forced the state to get better at taking care of its foster kids.
Okay, well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this particular lawsuit. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks for having me, LaTonya.
I've been talking with health reporter Catherine Sweeney about the class action federal lawsuit against Tennessee's DHS. This is LaTonya Turner, WPLN News.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. And thanks so much to all of you who've left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. That little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up next week.